everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and I am coming to you on a special Memorial Day edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I hope you guys are all enjoying your day off. Hopefully, you're getting a day off. And any of you who have served in the armed forces and helped make this country what it is, just know huge amount of gratitude and thanks for your service and for what you've done for the country. And if you're a family member of someone who served, if you've lost somebody, anybody, appreciate all the family members that make sacrifices so those in their family can serve the country. So really appreciate everybody who has really put the country first. It's not often. It's not the easiest thing to do. And I have a ton of respect for people in our armed forces and who have served the country that way. So thank you for your service and appreciate you. Also hope that everyone's getting some barbecue today or golf or whatever your thing is. I had to start my Memorial Day watching a TV show. I didn't have to, but I've been watching The Last of Us on, what is it, HBO Max now? I don't even know what to call it, but I went to bed last night. I don't watch it live when it comes out, and there were so many people spoiling the finale on Twitter that I felt like I just had to watch it this morning before someone really spoiled it for me. So apologies for being a little bit late coming out for you this morning, but had to get that out and done. Don't worry, I will not spoil it for you. Been an interesting season of that show for sure. But something else happened that, we've been talking about for a while and want to celebrate with you all. And if you have been following along, it won't be a surprise to see, but we did it, folks. We hit 20,000 subscribers here on YouTube. I really appreciate everybody who has come along for this journey. When I started this daily Hawk Blogger Morning show last year, we were at like 7,000 subscribers or so. So really been growing and really grateful for the people that have made this a fun community. It's a good crew and people treat each other well. And I think generally the comment section is a safe place, which is pretty rare on the internet. People have some strong perspectives, but that's fine. Generally, it's a pretty kind place overall, which I'm happy about. And the chat during the show is always amazing. So really appreciate everybody who's been along for the ride. Who knows how big this will be, how long this will go. So I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts. I'm going to enjoy having this with all of you, and we'll see how big this can actually be. So the show that I wanted to do today was something I've been thinking about for a while. And it came up to me yesterday when I was looking back. Actually, it's funny. I have been golfing a couple times the past few weeks, and one of them, probably my best round was with two 49ers fans, which was rough, but they were actually pretty nice, good guys. And one of them had moved to Seattle and is planning to raise his kids as Seahawks fans. So I feel like that's a victory. And then yesterday I was golfing with some guys who are Seahawks fans and been Seahawks fans for a long time. And a couple things have become really clear to me. One, a lot of people didn't like Geno Smith in Seattle. Two, there's a lot more enthusiasm for this year's version of the Seahawks than last year's version of the Seahawks. And three, I think that I'm in this very comfortable place for me, which is I think that the national narrative is way wrong and way too pessimistic on the Seahawks. I also think that the kind of fan base reaction that I'm getting may be a little bit forgetful about some of the failings of this team last year, and maybe a little bit more optimistic than I think is warranted. So I tend to find myself in the middle on some of these things. I think I find myself there now. I'm very excited about this upcoming season, but there was something that really held this team back last year. And it wasn't just the offense, it wasn't just the run game, it wasn't just, the bad defense in the middle of the season. It was this repeated pattern that happened where the Seahawks, the way sports work is you can build up your resume and then you get to these midterms, these finals, these tests of who you are as a team. And either you pass those tests and you graduate to the next grade, or you fail and you are stuck there and you're kind of in purgatory. And that happened repeatedly with the Seahawks last year. And so I want to kind of take us back through that and take you through some of what was a surprising perpetrator of those poor performances in big games. It wasn't always the thing that you might remember the Seahawks to be from last year. And I think it points to some of what the Seahawks need to still prove heading into this next season. So before I do that, give the show a like, click subscribe, be part of this growing community. We'd appreciate having you on there. Join over at patreon.com/hawkblogger. Get ad-free audio versions of this show, access to the Discord channel, as well as other benefits. I'm going to be still working on this project that I'm keeping under wraps until I get far enough to believe it's going to actually work. But there will be some more benefits for Patreon members coming up soon, and looking forward to sharing that with you all. All right, so first things first, let's kind of remember how last season played out. The Seahawks, as you remember, won game 1 against the Broncos. They beat Bo Nix in his first game in Seattle. Little did we know that that was going to be maybe one of the highest quality victories the Seahawks would have on the year, and one of the few home wins that they had on the year. But they went 1-0. They won that game 26-20. Then they went to New England. They won in that game 23-20. Not a pretty game, but they won. And that was in overtime, by the way. Then they came home and they beat the Tua-less Miami Dolphins 24-3, and they were 3-0. Okay. At this point in time, the Seahawks had the number 1 DVOA defense in the NFL. They were, flying pretty high. They had scored at least 23 points in every game. And they were putting up a lot of yards through the air. They had thrown for 312 yards against the Patriots, 270 yards against the Dolphins, and were performing pretty well. And then came the primetime game on Monday night against the Detroit Lions. And we all know what happened in this one. This was a game where, yes, the Seahawks were missing all sorts of players on defense. I think Byron Murphy was out. I want to say they might have been missing Leonard Williams. They were missing most of their, starting linebackers. They're missing all sorts of players on defense, especially. And they end up losing that game 42-29. And I'm going to come back to these games in a second, but I just want to kind of reset the rhythm of that season. So that was the first opportunity for the Seahawks to really prove something. And if you remember, they actually came out of that game with more national respect, almost like a half graduation, because even in defeat, they put up 516 yards of offense. Geno Smith was fantastic in that game. If not for DK Metcalf fumbling early on, that might have been a closer game. There's a number of things that went on there, but the offense was electric in that game. Ken Walker was electric in that game. That was a game where they ran for 133 yards. So that was a game where, Ryan Grubb actually stood out and pulled out the halfback or the JSN lateral on a third down play, and he passed it across the field to Charbonnet for a first down. There was like a lot of hope coming out of that game, even though they lost pretty convincingly. But then they failed at home to the Giants. And then they had the last of their 3 games in 11 days home against the 49ers on Thursday night. This was their next primetime game. It was another test. This is a division rival, the bully in the block, and a team that Mike Macdonald had pretty good performance and track record against from Baltimore. Well, they got rolled 36-24. The 49ers piled up 228 yards of rushing and 483 yards of offense overall. So this was 0 for 2 in big game, prime time opportunities to prove yourself. But this was the point where they started making some changes to personnel. And you got Roy Robertson Harris added to the team. You had started seeing Josh Jobe get some snaps at corner. You started seeing Kobe Bryant getting some snaps at safety. And some of these things, Byron Murphy came back and was now playing and healthy. And they go to Atlanta and they blow out the Falcons 34-14. And despite still having some issues on defense for the most part, I mean, the defense had a defensive score in that game. They were pretty dominant. They made Kirk Cousins look really bad. And the offense was good enough. So they come home for their next big opportunity. This was in week 8 against the Buffalo Bills. This was not a primetime game, but this was maybe their biggest opponent on the season. And a chance for them to prove that this defensive personnel that they added, that they were healthy, that maybe that 3-game in 11 days stretch was just that. It was 3 games in 11 days. They just got out over their skis and could not get back on balance. And maybe now they had righted the ship. Well, that game wasn't close either. 31-10. The Bills absolutely rolled the Seahawks in that game. It was never a game. So that's 3 big game contests that the Seahawks had. They lost. Now, you could consider the Rams game, if you wanted to, another, like the home game that they lost after, another test or, graduation opportunity. I didn't really consider it that at that point. It didn't feel like that. The Bills game, there was nothing that had been built up at that point. Everything had been torn down. There was a very little confidence that things were going in the right direction. The Seahawks were 4-4 heading into that Rams game. The Rams were not that good at that point. So I just didn't see that as being a major test. If you want to consider that, fine. They lost that one too, although it was a different type of game. So then they were on this streak. After the bye week, they won 4 in a row. They beat the 49ers in San Francisco. They beat the Cardinals at home. They beat the Jets in New York, and they beat the Cardinals in Arizona. So all of a sudden, a 4-5 team had become an 8-5 team. And the defense that we had seen just absolutely get decimated by team after team after team during the middle of the season, all of a sudden was ascending and hadn't allowed more than 21 points to an opponent. And really, like, to 3 division opponents, hadn't allowed more than 18 points. And so then there's this building sense that they had something going, and maybe they had found something that this defense would be tough enough to face their next big test. And that was the Green Bay Packers at home on, what was that? Was that Monday night? No, that was Sunday night. That was a Sunday night primetime game. So this was their 3rd primetime game. Yeah, I think this was their 3rd primetime game at that point. And they got blown out of their own stadium. Again, 30-13 was the final score in that game. You could consider the Vikings game after that another opportunity to prove themselves, even though they had lost the previous week. If they had beaten the Vikings, you kind of could say, hey, they split against the NFC North opponents there at home, and they were going to be really in good position to win their division. They lost that game as well. So you might be saying, God, Brian, this is so depressing. My God, like, why are you going through this? Well, because I think it's important to remember that every time the season crescendoed last year, it crashed back down. And so the Seahawks have yet to actually meet the moment and succeed in one of these big test games. And one of the things I found when I went back and looked at those games, they weren't just big losses. They were big losses right away. If you look at the Lions game, the Lions averaged 5 yards per play in the first half. They Amon-Ra St. Brown had 92 yards. Sorry, Jared Goff did not have an incompletion. Had 92 yards in the first half. They had 82 yards rushing. Jahmyr Gibbs had 2 touchdowns. David Montgomery had 1. And between the two of them, they had nearly 100 yards rushing in the first half. When we got to the Bills game, actually, let's do the 49ers game next. The 49ers game was next. And the 49ers averaged 7.6 yards per play in the first half of that game. Brock Purdy threw for 139 yards and a touchdown, 9.9 yards per attempt. Deebo Samuel had 87 yards receiving in the first half. And Jordan Mason had 65 yards rushing on over 8 yards per carry. Again, it was not a game right away. The score of that game was 16-6 at half. The score of the Lions Seahawks games was 21-7 at half. So then you get to the Bills game. The Bills were only up 14-3 at halftime. But if you look at their offensive production, they were at 5.7 yards per play. Josh Allen had 152 yards passing and 2 touchdowns in the first half. And again, they'd given up 74 yards rushing in the first half, over 6 yards a carry, including 56 yards to James Cook. Now, we get to the Packers game, and this one to me was the biggest fail. This was the most unforgivable game of the season for the Seahawks to me. This was a game where the Packers were not that good, especially on defense, and their offense had been sporadic. And they came in and they just absolutely rolled the Seahawks. They win the coin toss, they take the ball, they go 63 yards on the opening drive for a touchdown. Seahawks punt. The Packers take the ball 80 yards on their next drive, touchdown. Seahawks get a field goal. Packers go 51 yards for another field goal. Seahawks throw an interception. Packers go 83 yards for a field goal, and that's the end of the first half. So you had a defense give up 63-yard, 80-yard, 51-yard, and 83-yard drives in the first half of that game. The Packers averaged 7.1 yards per play in the first half. Jordan Love had 142 yards and a touchdown, almost 11 yards per throw. He was 12 out of 13, only 1 incompletion. And the Packers ran for 93 yards, 73 of which came from Josh Jacobs, who also had 38 yards rushing. Josh Jacobs had over 100 yards of scrimmage, 100 scrimmage yards of offense in the first half, along with a touchdown. Now, the one big game that I would say that the Seahawks showed up for was against the Vikings. Yet, the Vikings still led 17-14 at halftime. They led 7-0 after one period, after one quarter. And they ended up their first possession, 70-yard drive for a touchdown. They also had a 67-yard drive for a touchdown. But at least they only averaged 4.2 yards per play compared to the other teams in the first half we talked about, night and day. Sam Darnold threw for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half. They did have 53 yards rushing, which is not crazy, but not great. Aaron Jones had 12 carries for 51 yards for 4.3 yards per carry. So the reason why I'm going through this is that the Seahawks, the pattern, what we found in these big games, these big tests, was that the defense did not do their jobs in the first half. They were run over, passed through by all of these teams. And I think that's one of the lingering, like, massive questions I've got going into this season, because as much as I respect Mike Macdonald and I'm happy that he's the coach of this team, they were outcoached in a lot of these games. Like LaFleur, I was watching the replay of the Packers Seahawks game, at least the first half of that game, and it seemed like every time the Seahawks would move their defensive line personnel, the Packers had an answer and were attacking the little bubbles that they were creating for running plays. And the Seahawks, to their credit, tightened up. And in the second half of that game, the Packers only averaged 4.3 yards of offense. And they only had 47 yards rushing, and they averaged under 3 yards per carry. So they made some adjustments, but they were knocked on their asses to start that game and had no answers. And it did not seem, from what I could see, it wasn't like they were necessarily just getting overpowered. They were getting out play called. And it might not have been that there was like, oh, here is a play and it beat your play. I think there might have been rules in place for Jordan Love at the line of scrimmage. And when they saw this look to run this play and to exploit these gaps that were being created along the line. So I look at that and I say, like, all right, what has to happen for that to no longer be the case? We talk a lot about the offense on this team and about the change in coaching and the change in quarterbacks and the change in receivers and the draft picks that have been added in the offensive line. All of that for sure matters. But we kind of take for granted that this defense is going to be as good or better than as it was last year. It wasn't good enough last year. In the moments that mattered, this defense was not good enough last year. And I think that all starts with the run defense. Going back through, just to share with you again, in these games, against the Lions, they gave up 88 yards rushing in the first half and 3 rushing touchdowns. Against the 49ers, they gave up 105 yards rushing in the first half. Against the Bills, they gave up 74 yards rushing in the first half. Against the Packers, 93 yards rushing in the first half. And then against the Vikings, they did a little bit better, 53 yards rushing. And if you look at the Seahawks and their run defense, that's been the place where Mike Macdonald has had some issues, even back with Baltimore. Have they done enough to not be bullied by really good teams, good offenses in these big moments, especially to start games? I don't know. Like, here's the things that they have done that could help in that situation. They signed DeMarcus Lawrence, who is one of the best run defending edge players in the NFL. He's older. You don't know when that's going to start to fall off. Calais Campbell's managed to do it for a long time. Maybe DeMarcus Lawrence can continue to be an elite run defender. Uchenna Nwosu, if he's back and healthy and able to play, is a very good edge run defender. Boye Mafe, you heard me talk about him on the show I did about the edges. He took his biggest step forward last year in run defense, not as a pass rusher, but in run defense. Derek Hall, I think, is a very aggressive, physical run defender and has a lot to offer there. He has some work to do, but I think he has all the tools. And then you've got Jaron Reed and Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams. I'm not sure you have, other than Byron Murphy, maybe second year in, maybe gets a little bit better at certain things. I'm not sure there's a story to tell there about why they'd be better at defensive tackle. And then nose tackle, I mean, it's Jonathan Hankins. And I just don't think Jonathan Hankins was enough of a factor last year, especially in these situations. And you don't have Roy Robertson Harris anymore. That's or Draymond Jones. So that's going to be more DeMarcus Lawrence in those situations. From a linebacker perspective, Ernest Jones, Tyrese Knight, same guys. So I don't think you have a story to tell why that would be better than it was last year. Tyrese Knight, second season, stronger, maybe smarter. Those things could help. And then cornerback, it's a challenge. Devin Witherspoon's a great run defender at the corner position. Reek Woolen, one of the least told stories among Seahawks fans is Reek Woolen took a huge step forward as a run defender last year. I think Nicky Manwari could be part of this, but that wasn't a strength of his in college. Maybe Riley Mills when he gets healthy, whenever that is, maybe he can contribute here. Do you believe that Mike Morris is going to take a step? Do you believe that one of the nose tackles that we don't know yet, like Quentin Bohanna or Brandon Peely or someone else, is going to take a step forward and really plug the middle of that line? I want to look to see where the Seahawks were most vulnerable when it came to running last year. My sense was that it was up the middle, but I'm curious if that's right. So I'm going to look at ftnfantasy.com. If you use promo code HBAM, you get 15% off there. I use Stats Hub all the time. So I'm going to look at the Seahawks and where they gave up the most yards rushing. So I think they have run types. This is not exactly a good indicator, but we can see with some of these. For inside zone, the Seahawks gave up 14th. We're 14th in inside zone. So that's not bad. Outside zone. Oh, wow. So this is where the Seahawks struggled. 5.1 yards per carry on outside zone. That ranked 28th in the NFL. Against power, the Seahawks, this is another place they struggled. Seahawks gave up 6.3 yards per carry against power run plays last year. Against man blocking, so this is like gap scheme stuff, the Seahawks ranked 18th. So more middle of the pack, 4.5. Against counters, the Seahawks ranked 25th in the NFL, 5.3 yards per carry. Against when they had stacked boxes, meaning they had an extra guy in the box, Seahawks ranked 14th. They actually had a really bad game against the 49ers in that regard. Designed rushes that are specifically designed for the quarterback. Let's see how the Seahawks did against that. 18th in the NFL. So let's look at scrambles just as another type of run out there. The Seahawks were pretty good on scrambles. They were 6th in the NFL in yards against on scrambles. So what did we learn here? Inside zone was one of their better performances last year on defense. Outside zone, they were quite bad. Powers, they were bad. They were not that bad in like against gap scheme stuff. But this is an issue. And I'm not sure that we've got the answer for how it's going to be better this year. And if the Seahawks cannot defend the run better than they did last year, then I just don't see a reason to believe that they're going to do better in playing these big teams in big moments. I'm kind of curious, like, where do the Seahawks rank on defending first down runs? Let's take a quick look. I haven't looked this up yet. So first down, let's do early down runs, first and second down, and then let's go to first and second down. We'll start there, and then I might narrow it down to just first downs. And let's just look at running plays. I'm not going to look at plays where they gave up passing yards on those. The Seahawks last year on early down runs, Seahawks gave up 4.5 yards per carry on first and second down. That ranked 23rd in the NFL. So not one of the things that they did well, and I think it's a contributing factor. If we look at first downs, I'm just curious if first down in particular was a problem area for the Seahawks. On first down runs, the Seahawks gave up 4.6 yards per carry. That's a lot. That ranked 27th in the NFL. So I think these early down runs are going to be a key part of how they get this monkey off their back. And if you look at this season and you look at this schedule, which are the teams that they're going to be able to prove themselves against? Because there isn't really a Buffalo Bills on this team, on this schedule. There isn't even necessarily a Green Bay Packers that have the same amount of respect. Even the Detroit Lions went into last year as a Super Bowl favorite. There isn't necessarily a Super Bowl favorite on the Seahawks schedule. There are teams that might be contenders, but I don't think that there's a Super Bowl favorite. Before I answer that question about which of these games could be the real test, let me get this super chat here. Vince Cho has been a member for 9 months. He says, congratulations on 20,000 subscribers, Brian. Man, thanks, Vince. Appreciate you using your super chat on that. Very nice of you. And I'm enjoying it, man. This is fun. All right. So if we look at the schedule this year, what are the games that the Seahawks could prove to you that they've ascended? And I'll tell you what those games are for me. It starts week 1. The first game against the 49ers, I think that is 100% a statement game. And that's going to set the tone for the whole season. If you don't beat the 49ers at home in your season opener, you're setting a tone that you're not going to like in terms of what it's saying about your team. I don't think you can make this case that going to Pittsburgh is a statement thing. If the Seahawks go in and beat Pittsburgh, even if they've got Aaron Rodgers, yes, it will matter. It's not going to send ripple effects through the NFL that the Seahawks have arrived. I don't think beating the Cardinals on Thursday Night Football, even in Arizona, is a statement game. I don't think the Tampa Bay Bucks at home is a statement game. That's a game that the Tampa team has respect around the league and around analysts. So it definitely would help the Seahawks gain some respect, but I don't think beating the Bucks at home and Baker Mayfield, I just don't think that's a statement game. It's not at Jacksonville. Against the Texans at home on Monday night, depending on how the Texans are playing, that might be their second real opportunity at a statement win. That is a playoff team from last year. CJ Stroud, obviously very good. The defense for the Texans, really good. It's possible the Texans could come into that game with a very good record, and that could be a statement game. And then they get a bye week, and then the next one, which is the clear, we'll have to see how the Commanders turn out. But this was an NFC championship team last year. They may have the best quarterback in the NFC in Jaden Daniels. That's debatable. I'm happy to have that debate, but Jaden Daniels was unreal as a rookie. And you have to think he'll be better, although I think they might be facing a little bit stiffer competition this coming year. But winning in Washington against that team, assuming that they are still going to be good this year, which I assume is the case, that's probably the biggest chance at a statement win for the Seahawks on the whole schedule. Even though the 49ers game to me would be a huge statement, and I think to a lot of Seahawks fans, 49ers won 6 games last year. It's going to be at home. I don't know if that's going to qualify. I don't think that's going to – it'll definitely send a message. And I do think for me, there's no question that is a statement game. But after that, I think the Commanders is the only other one that is clearly a statement game. Other ones that could end up being that, obviously the Rams game in LA, depending on how the Rams are playing. I don't think the Vikings at home will qualify, but who knows? I think the Falcons, it's possible that could be a big game in Atlanta. That's really it. I mean, you talk about the division games, they all have some significance. So, of course, they all have a chance to be statements of some sort. But I think I look at the Commanders as a team outside the division that has a real chance to be one of the contenders for a Super Bowl this year. You have to assume that after what they did last year. I think that the Texans have a really bad offensive line, and maybe they'll overcome it this year better than they did last year. But I'm just not sure that team qualifies. I don't think that team is like the Packers from last year, or even the Vikings from last year, or the Bills or the Lions. I just don't think it's that level of team. So I think if you're looking for actually proving something about this team ascending, I think it's going to be your division games against the 49ers and the Rams, and it's going to be the Commanders game. You're not going to get as many chances, and more of the statement games this year are going to be on the road. Now, the Seahawks did pretty well away from home last year, but they also had a relatively easy schedule away from home last year. So I think, you look at these teams, you look at teams that you think the 49ers are going to want to establish the run against the Seahawks. They absolutely are going to come out trying to run the ball. The Seahawks have to be able to stuff the run. The Steelers are going to do that in week 2. The Cardinals certainly will be doing that. And I think the Commanders will likely be a team that does that. But interestingly, if I look at what are the teams that were top in DVOA last year in terms of running offense. Let me pull that up real quick. So rush offense, Baltimore, Detroit, Green Bay, Buffalo, Atlanta. So the Seahawks face Atlanta this year. Philadelphia, Washington was 7th. Tampa Bay was 8th. Arizona was 9th. Indianapolis was 10th. Indianapolis is an interesting one to watch. Their style may be more challenging for the Seahawks than Seahawks fans want to believe. The Rams were 11th. The 49ers were 13th. The Saints were 14th. Which is pretty impressive. The Saints were 14th in rushing DVOA with all those injuries. Carolina was 15th. So the Seahawks will face 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of their 17 games next year will come against teams that were top 15 DVOA rush teams last year. So they're going to be tested in their run defense early and often through this season. The question is, have they made adjustments? Have they gotten better? Has the personnel improved? I'm not sure you can make the case the personnel's really improved other than maybe the DeMarcus Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu situation if those guys are healthy and can contribute and are playing at a good level. Otherwise, I'm not sure you can really make the case that they have gotten better in that regard. This is going to be one that is going to continue to linger for this Seahawks squad until they are the team that comes out in these big contests and punches first, until they're the team that scares other teams versus needing to prove that they are not intimidated. I love Leonard Williams. I love that he recognized Josh Jacobs and how well he played, how tough of a back he is. I would love for the other team's players to say, man, I knew those guys were good. I just didn't know how good or how physical. They were tough. That's not something we heard enough about this Seahawks defense last year. So I think that's to me a sobering but important memory of that 2024 season. And the Seahawks are going to have to exercise those demons because you just are going to be an irrelevant team until you make a change in that regard. All right, folks. If you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. I would appreciate it. If you haven't been to jkboots.com lately, do that. Use code HawkBlogger. Get yourself $75 off the best boots you're ever going to own, and give $15 automatically goes to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation, keeping Northwest Forest safe and Northwest Forest firefighters safe while protecting our forests. So head on over to jkboots.com, use code HawkBlogger. I've got more fun stuff coming for you. We'll get some Father's Day promotions going to start sharing in the next few days. The Seahawks OTAs start tomorrow. They are not open to the media until later in June, so I won't be able to attend, but we will continue to monitor, see what happens coming out of those. And until I see you guys all next, have a great Memorial Day. Thank you for getting us to 20,000 subscribers. Really, really appreciate y'all. Have a great day. This was another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings.